Welcome to TORAH Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 10 of Controversial Issues with the crazy Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. That's funny. I'm having to learn to just, whenever I introduce this whole thing, not look at you, because if I do, I just think about all the funny stuff we talked about before the show, and I'll completely get derailed, so we can't have that. So, welcome back, Rabbi. How are you?
Pleasure's all mine, I'm sure. Welcome to everyone.
Yes, very, very good. Pardon me. Shalom, Miguel Carrera. Shalom, Dewey. Shalom, Michael Faircloth, Spiritual Talmud. Good to see you guys online. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat. Okay, so tonight's topic, if you noticed, is fallen angels. Okay, and I know, I can't prove it on my ID, but okay, scratch that. That was good. I saw a funny thing one time on a movie, a long time line right there. So, cool deal. Walter, welcome. Kelsey Lynn, good to see you. Shalom, Rita, my sweet sister there. Good to see you. Mitch, you're the man. All right, well, we're going to get kicked off here. So, without further ado, we'll turn this over to you, Rabbi, and I'll challenge you as much as I can.
I have no doubt about that.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Let's get rolling in. And the phone lines I will open up, but please, let's keep it topic related for the most part. Either it doesn't have to be on the fallen angels, but it does need to be regarding a controversial issue. Okay? So, like whether Meryl Streep is like a reincarnation of Hillary, Clinton. I don't know yet. I don't know if you can reincarnate somebody who's still alive, but okay. Okay. Hope that doesn't get
I'd have to go back to those Freddy Krueger movies to see if that's, if that's true or not. So I guess first off, before we get to really, the proofs and, go through some text, we'll see where everything goes. First thing is that Judaism definitely does not believe in fallen angels. We'll see what the Christian belief is and sort of knock that off. So all you Christians out there, be careful. One thing for sure is that, one of the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam, of Maimonides, is that God is absolute. If God is absolute, that means he has no needs. He's not lacking anything. He's omniscient. He knows everything, right? Everything is foreseen from him from the beginning of time. Nothing is hidden from him. Nothing is concealed from him. I.e., that means nothing is outside of him. So God set up a system of steps, of sequences, whatever you want to call it, and he willed everything into existence and made it function. So you can say that God is the God of nature. God, controls everything from above and below. Now, this is where it gets pretty wild, and that is that everything is sustained and influenced by God himself as he desires. Now, that means God is in control, as we mentioned, of nature. God can change nature whenever he wants. We've seen that in history, when we go through, over the next number of weeks, what happened in Egypt with the plagues, right? God, changes nature with the frogs, with lice, with the wild animals and all that. So, it's interesting that when God comes to Moshe and tells him he wants to, take out the Jewish people, and, Moshe looks up to heaven and he sees how the stars are set up, how the constellations are set up, and he says, he sees an angel, of God and an angel of the Egyptians, meaning that every nation has their guardian angel to watch over them, to plead in front of God what they need or whatever the case is. And he saw these two angels intertwined, right? Kind of like a DNA molecule, like a double helix. So Moshe says to God, I can't go there. What am I going to do? According to nature, it's an impossibility for the Jewish people ever to come out. So God says, Mo, what are you worried about? I'm above nature.
Mo.
I can stop nature if I choose. So don't worry. These miracles that are going to happen, I'm going to take out the Jewish people in that miraculous way. So God, again, he can change nature whenever he wants. He can do whatever he wants. So you say, well, how do I know that? When does that happen? So if I knew that, I wouldn't be, with you, and everyone listening right now, I'd be world famous. But the where it starts to get a little bit wild is the fact that God influences an angel, who then in turn influences another angel on another level. In other words, there's a hierarchy of of angels. Some obviously in a higher level, some on a lower level. It depends. It depends on what their purpose is, what they were created for, and this continues step by step until a final angel acts upon the physical thing. So you have a spiritual entity who's in charge of physical things. Now this is brought down by the Medrash, by the Zohar, according to Kabbalah. So this angel, whatever its job is either going to sustain something or bring about something new, or even just guard it. But of course there's always a but, and the but is that God ultimately is the one making the decree. Everything emanates from him. So what does that mean? It means nothing can be outside of him, right? None of these angels can say, I'm going to do what I want. The angel of the ocean is going to say, I want to destroy half of Southeast Asia, right? I want to make a tsunami. So God says, I don't think so.
Okay, let me interrupt you just for a second. Let's up front as we can. Let's put out a few of the statements that provoked the title of the show. A few false claims about fallen angels. What's the purpose of this show? I've heard all kinds of stories, believe me, of the fallen angels realm, about how, in fact, there's even stories in the Midrash actually that you could derive these fallen angel stories from. Meaning that, of course, you already know what I'm talking about. But it says in the Midrash, it said that there was God was going to send down the Torah, and the angels was like, "Hey, we can do this thing," And so God's like, "Okay, give it a whack," and they wound up messing it up. And then you have the verse in Genesis where it says that the sons of God had come to know the daughters of men, right?
Right.
And it really makes it look like something really supernatural was going on with the high volume of these entities. So,
right.
Okay, so that's all I've heard. So what other claims are there about fallen angels, and why is it a problem?
Well, again, the reason why it's a problem is if we believe what we do, which, again, according to the Rambam and the 13 Principles of Faith, if God is absolute, and God is in control, God has the ability, another of the 13 principles, he has the ability to reward and punish, right? There can't be anything outside of him that he does not control. If you say that something else can, in other words, maybe God created the world, disappeared, and he let all these other parts of nature take over. So then we'll wear these stupid t-shirts that say stuff happens, right? Or, with the big finger say, oh, I'm with stupid, he's over there, right? But the reality is that if you take God out of the picture at any single time, then the world goes back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, right? That original chaos, kind of that, chaos at the back of that Led Zeppelin album, right? So then people start asking, when bad things happen to good people, but getting carried away. The idea is that, again, you can't take God out of the picture. So the first major case where people will claim that there is such an idea of a fallen angel is go to Genesis chapter 3. Beginning of Genesis chapter 3 is the famous story with the snake, right? And what happened to Adam and Eve. Now, the snake came and spoke, tried to get Eve to eat from the tree and change history, which the snake did. So there's a number of opinions of what this snake actually was. Some say that, as the Talmud brings out, that the snake definitely was a helper to man, had feet, right? Had legs, was stood upright, which we don't see that today by snakes, but the punishment was that it had the legs cut off. So
from what I understand, I think they said the science has actually proven that the snakes actually have like appendages, like areas where there were appendages there, which is really freaky. If there's never been another snake since then, but they've got these little things that are just ready to sprout legs. So that's pretty cool, man. It's pretty cool.
Tell the joke, say that wasn't funny, whap, and it stands up, right? You thought that was funny? Watch this, Start juggling things on its tail. So that's one thing. One idea is that Watt had the ability to talk. Others say, which is probably, I would probably say is I guess more of a majority opinion, and that is that it was the evil inclination, or as Mr. Satan himself, right, who is the evil inclination, and his job, we'll see, is to get people to do the wrong thing. That is what his purpose is. When we see the beginning of the book of Job, we'll see that he's limited in what he can do. He can only do what God wills him to do, right? But the purpose of the evil inclination, or the Satan, or whatever you want to call it, angel of death, also as he's known as, is to test us, right? Either that's why we have free will. Either we'll do the right thing, or we'll do the wrong thing. So in that sense, I had someone, one of these Freemasons, argue with me about their how much they the worship angels, etc. But he said, look, everything comes back to the sin of the snake, to what the snake did, which the world, I agree, and Judaism will agree 100% that the world is absolutely changed because of what the snake did. Why? Because we don't believe in death. Death was never supposed to be in the world. But now that man ate from the tree, so now they have to go through a process of atonement. And therefore, that's why God threw them out of the Garden of Eden. Because what was God worried about? They would eat from the tree of life. And if they eat from the tree of life, fame, right? I'm going to live forever. Anyway, the tree of life, they're going to live forever. And if they live forever, what about atonement? So God, had to change the way the world was set up in order for that to happen. So therefore, God said, all right, everyone out of the pool, right? And he throws them out of the garden, and he's got these angels, these fiery angels that guard the tree of life. So if anyone ever, got back to the Garden of Eden, wherever it may be today, well, you're not going to make it to the tree of life, most likely. So that's probably one of the main, that's one of the main things that, one of the first things actually, they'll say is look at that fallen angel. Now, he is, an angel is a messenger, right? He's a messenger. It derives from the Greek word. The Greek word is angelos, right? I work on my Greek a little bit, which means a messenger, right? So there are many angels that are mentioned, in the Bible itself, and he carries out the will of God, and we don't see that, any better than, in the book of Job, right? But another claim of them will be, if you look at now, the Christians have a major issue with this, because they don't believe that God created evil, right? So I guess even before before going to the main questions, the main examples, they have a major issue, right? And their major issues, if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15, it says over there, see, I, meaning God, have set before you this day life and good, death and evil. So when God created the world, as the prophet Isaiah says, chapter 45, verse 7, it says, I form the light, create darkness, I make peace, and, this is a hard one, and create evil.
Right.
I, the Lord, do all these things. So according to this, there's a divine plan, which every searching soul certainly must confront evil, right? It's a hard thing to understand. Could be a good controversial topic as well. But God gave free will to man, right? Separates us from everybody else. So therefore, you want to reach a higher, spiritual existence, so to speak. So you have to have this, evil has to exist in order to test us. Now, according to the Christians, this is a major issue, major issue, because they're going to maintain God did not create Satan, right? He didn't create evil. So according to them, right, Satan, what did he do? He had his own spiritual defiance, totally disobeyed, right? In what we call an angel from hell, right? Totally disobeyed. And he became this chief adversary and slanderer, for God and the embodiment of evil. So according to them, God could never have created evil. Why? Because God's the author of righteousness and perfection. So if you're a Zoroastrians believe there's a good God and a bad God. So that gets you out of the problem of good and evil. Because either you got the good God doing good things, you got the bad God trying to, fight against that, or, whatever the case is. But obviously dual deities or more than one deity is totally foreign to Judaism as well. Because as we say twice a day, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, God is one. So you can have more than one, you can have more than one deity. So according to the Christians, this defiance, comes, at God's expense, so to speak, which we don't, we certainly don't, we don't believe it. So they're going to say that, this angel can do whatever he wants and is outside of, God's realm. God doesn't control it. It can do all kinds of crazy things. But they have a major issue. The major issue is, when the Torah says, or when prophet Isaiah says that God created evil, and in the book of Deuteronomy also a similar idea, they can't hold by that. Right? They absolutely can't hold by that because, obviously they believe that angels are free to do whatever, they want, which again, according to the book of Job, that is, that's totally not true. And it's very, without oral tradition, we'll look at that for a second. So people say, oh, you're in the Midrash, it's Zohar, it's the Talmud, and the corruptness, and all this. All right, let's look at what the text says. Right? We'll look exactly what the text says. You can argue, on the text. So in the first chapter of the book of Job, Satan appears before God with a host of other angels. Right? Comes with his henchmen, with these other angels, and he suggests Job's not so righteous. He's not fully tested. And he says, Job might lose his faith if he's confronted by personal pain, right? Take away his wife, take away his kids, take away, his money, take away everything that he has, and he's going to blaspheme against you. He's going to call you out. So he wants permission from God to test him, right? To test his virtue. So God grants him this petition. Again, it's there explicitly, but he makes conditions. There are outlines for Mr. Satan. We'll call him Mr. S, right? Mr. S, you're not allowed to do that. And when you're testing him, this is what you're allowed to do. You can make him sick. You can take away his livelihood. You can take away his wife and his kids. But you're not allowed to kill him. There are specific instructions. So his faith is challenged. By the third chapter, he begins to struggle, questions his maker. Why was he created in the first place? He gets to despair. He wished that he perished in his mother's womb. Nonetheless, he does not curse God. What does he curse? He does curse the day that he was born, but he does not curse God.
Okay, well, let's insert a quick question. I'm trying. I don't want to wait too long because otherwise it'll just get dropped off. Okay. Brian Aruba says, "Hey, Rabbi, is Lucifer and Satan two different beings?" That's a great question.
I have no idea who Lucifer is.
Okay, let me word it differently. Was the serpent in the garden? Was that Satan?
That was Satan. Yeah.
Okay.
He was Satan is known as the evil inclination, the angel of death.
Okay,
That's
so
who he is, and he can disguise himself in many different ways.
okay, so Lucifer and Satan in this regard, because I've heard stories from different rabbis that says that they're not the same. Like Lucifer, the adversary, is not the same as the thing that was in the garden with Adam and Eve.
The thing that was in the garden with Adam and Eve is a whole major, the whole major question. One of the commentaries tries to explain the fact that you don't have snakes that speak, right? Some say,
True.
which he wants to reject. Some want to say that God gave him the ability to speak. It's no different than with the donkey of Bilam, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That
yeah.
he opened the donkey's mouth.
I never connected
right?
those two before.
Some will say in that case that God did the same thing with the snake. Can the snake really speak? No. So others will say it was like mental telepathy. He didn't really speak, but Eve understood, I guess, from his motions or from I don't know, we'll call it spiritual cooties, whatever it is. She understood, right, what he was trying to get at without speaking. Others say she understood the language of animals, so she didn't need to speak. But then you have a major question, which is, it says the snake spoke, right? So all you linguists out there and Karaites will say, but that's what the text says. The text says he spoke. How can you say he didn't speak? So the Abarbanel, tries to explain, in a number of different ways, not that way. Not that he actually spoke. It's hard in the text. It's a very long Abarbanel over there. It's very hard in the text. If that's what the text says, it's hard to say it didn't say it, right?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other. The problem is there are a lot of other things, that are going on there. I mean, this is an extremely difficult thing, to understand. So people with limited knowledge will say, "See, this is true. This is," and they'll go on and on and on. This is a complex, totally complex thing. When you go through the book of Genesis in general, just as a short side point, we should get T-shirts printed when we go through it all these weeks and say, you go through creation, it's Kabbalah, stupid. That's what it is. It's a lot of these stories make absolutely no sense. I mean, the fallen, these Nephilim, right? We'll speak about, we'll speak about shortly. That these things need, definitely need clarification. So whatever the snake was, right? It's not the norm of what we think. And according to Jewish theology, which is clear, which nobody disagrees over here, is that these spiritual beings, as we mentioned before, according to the Medrash and according to Kabbalah, they cannot act out of their own. So let's say, we'll make it easy. Let's say God opened the snake's mouth to speak. So that means the snake has free will? No. Right? God spoke for him. That's what he wanted. He wanted to test man.
Okay.
God is not going to let things happen that he doesn't want to happen. Otherwise, the whole system of the Torah gets knocked down, right? That's what these Freemasons come out and they say, look, we have this proof over here. Must be the Talmud's not true. Well, I just gave you, someone wanted to say about like a serpent snake, for example, is, the question that any fish, that's kosher has scales and fins, right? So any fish that does that, you're not going to find a fish that has scales that doesn't have fins, and vice versa. So you say, what about, so there are certain fish that they're question marks. You take swordfish, for instance, which conservative movement will say is permissible to eat. Orthodox people say it's not permissible to eat because the scales fall off when it comes out of the water. There's a king clip fish out of South Africa, which has scales. You can't see them.
I've heard shark.
You can't see them with the naked eye.
I've heard sharks, or at least some species of sharks, it looks like catfish skin, but they said that the scales, same thing, are so tiny you can't actually see them with your eyes.
So that's the question by king clip, that if you can't see it, it means it doesn't exist, or it means it's there, you just can't see it. So the difference of opinion among the rabbinical authorities, among the later rabbinical authorities whether you're allowed to eat it or not. But anyway, the point is that, about there was a certain fish that I guess it's like a serpent, snake, or something like that either has scales and the fins you can't see or are not there. So the person wanted to say that see, we have a proof. Obviously the Talmud's not right. So there are a number of commentaries. It's quote unquote man explaining what this means, that go through exactly why that's not an issue. Oh, it's man-made. It's this, it's that. All right. Does it make sense? Or doesn't it make sense?
Right.
So, the problem is, again, we go back to oral tradition, and that is that, you have to start in context. If you don't start in context, then everything goes down by the wayside. So, back to Job for a second. I just want to show what the Christians do, right? That the Bible says that God created evil, right? This goes against the Christian idea of salvation. So what did the church do? They mistranslated it. Instead of translating this offensive Hebrew word of ra, the word ra in Hebrew, resh ayin, right? Means evil.
Right.
What do they translate it as? Disaster. So the translation goes like this. Is a New Testament translation of Isaiah 45. It says, I for the light I create light and darkness. I bring prosperity and not create evil. I create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. So the word disaster is totally misleading, totally ambiguous, and an uninformed reader could say, oh, it refers to natural disasters, typhoons, earthquakes, and hurricanes, which takes God totally out of the picture, that he's not in charge of evil.
Wow. Okay, well, let's take this caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
It's Michael Faircloth.
Hey, Michael, how are you? Welcome to the show again. What's your question for Rabbi?
Even most denominations of Christianity will say that angels do not have free will, but I've never heard of an explanation as to how the quote-unquote devil and one-third of the heavenly angels were able to rebel against God.
Okay, so I would further that, and I would say, is there anything in the Hebrew text that would suggest that a third of the angels rebelled against God and got cast to earth, kind of like the New Testament paints? Or is that just simply a New Testament fabrication? Sound good?
Pretty much. Yes.
All right. Hey, thanks for calling in, Michael.
All right.
Okay, shalom. All right, Rabbi.
Excellent question. I mean, not that I know of. The only case we do have is that the angels, when Moshe goes up to get the Torah, the angels don't want him to get it. And these fire angels, sort of stand in his path, in order to get the Torah. So, Moshe says, but the Torah applies to us, it doesn't apply to you. The Torah says you make a blessing after you eat food. You guys eat? No. It talks about death. You guys die? No. It talks about free will. You have free will? No. So angels go by the wayside, and he comes and gets the Torah. So, they can make suggestions. There are heavenly courts that are made up of angels that God oversees, and if he sees that they're going in the wrong direction, he will intercede. And he say, no, let's go a different direction. He doesn't, he's got his lackeys, so to speak, to do his job when he thinks they're out of line or going in the wrong direction. God will interfere. There's the whole question why he needs them, and why he set up that system anyway. But they can ask questions, and God can answer them, but they can't go against them. You see, for instance, give two examples. When the Torah says that God created man in our image, right, plural, everyone asks, see, there's more than one God, right? Rashi says people can make the mistake. They'll see that there's more than one deity. So when it says, when the Torah says that we created man in our image, who's he speaking to?
Mm-hmm.
Who's we? There's only one God, right? Who's we? So the commentaries say he's talking to his heavenly court. whether it's a good thing to create man, not a good
Sure.
thing to create man. There's a whole discussion, but it's showing God's humility. Did God need to, take his heavenly court in session and say, I got this idea. I'm going to create man. What do you think? Let's have a vote.
Well, that's not beyond reach. I mean, if you think about it, like I've used this before, my kids come out and help me in the shop a lot. And so one time David asked me, well, what are you building? And I said, we're going to build a cabinet and build some drawers to go in it. And so, it's very common around, like with me, and I've even heard others say this, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I've even heard bosses of companies say, well, what we need to do, and I'm thinking, oh, great, the boss is going to stick around and help us today. No, he's not going to stick around and help you today. He's saying we as a group. So it's not beyond the imagination to understand that text that way.
The Torah's written, the words that man, the words of man that we can certainly understand. But again, let's go back to, the 13 principles. If God is absolute and God is, everything, he doesn't need it. He doesn't need the angels. He doesn't need creation. He certainly doesn't need man. I mean, in certain cases, maybe he does. But, it shows his ability to come down to us, so to speak, and look at what's going on and then assess the situation. Another example is that he and his heavenly court come down to see what's going on in Sodom, right, before he decides to wipe out Sodom, and then he's going to tell Abraham what's going on. Abraham's going to pray for them, whatever the case is. But that doesn't make any sense either.
Right.
Why does he need? He knows what's going on, right? He knows if you've been naughty or nice, like right? So he's checking you out. He knows. So what does he need it for? So the commentaries say it shows humility, right? It absolutely shows humility. So can they gang up on God? No. There are times where the angels complain, and they say, like for instance, by the story of Rabbi Akiva, when Rabbi Akiva gets caught for teaching Torah, and they're ripping his flesh off with these iron combs. And the angels say, as the Talmud says, like this is the Torah and this is the merit for learning Torah. That guy's gonna, this righteous person, is going to get his flesh ripped off, and and that's what he gets for sitting and learning Torah. So God says that this is what's before me. This is, I understand this. You don't understand this. And if you open up your mouth again, I'm going to turn you into ashes, right? I'm just going to destroy you. So doesn't mean they don't have the ability to speak up and say things. They can't change things.
Okay, let's drop this cute little bomb on here. This is from Sal on YouTube. This is also a really excellent question.
All right, I'm sitting down. Go ahead.
I have my suspicions, but I want to see if they line up with what you're going to tell us. Okay, so Sal said, didn't Abraham feed 3 angels disguised as men, right? And so the question is, were the angels eating just to humor him? Maybe because God knew that Abraham was a servant. He wanted Abraham to be blessed by their accepting his hospitality. Did he know they were angels right away? What's the story behind all that?
So if you look at that story, so we'll mention one thing and get back to that. There are 3 angels that come, right? They're angels disguised as. And
just to be clear, God was already there. He was already talking with Abraham in the tent of his door.
Right.
So for the people thinking that's the Trinity, that's okay. I'll leave that alone.
Right. You also see, by the way, that he has this prophecy. He has this vision, right? God speaking to him, and these 3 Arabs seemingly come. And he wants to invite them as guests and says, God, I have to go. I have these guests. So you see that having guests is more important than even speaking to God. Right? That's one thing. Definitely one thing you learn out. So what? Back to the original question. These angels dressed up as men. So the commentaries say that how can angels eat even if they're in the guise of a human body? So the answer is they didn't eat. They looked like they were eating, right? So they weren't actually.
So they were like complimenting, or Hashem was using them to compliment Abraham's hospitality, basically.
Right.
Okay,
right. He wanted guests, so he brought them. Brought them as guests.
Okay. Now, just to throw another example out there, just to show you how not off the wall that really is. I can't tell you how many times that, and it's not the same topic of eating. However, it's the same topic of entertaining the delight of someone in their experiencing things. Okay, David and Sarah, my youngest kids, they come to me all the time and say, "Daddy, did you know?" And they'll tell me something that was like so elementary, but instead of saying, "Yeah, I already knew that," I'll be like, "Really? Tell me about that." And we will talk down and sit down and have a talk about it. And it encourages them and it really uplifts them for me to listen to them. And so I can see God in His great compassion. I can see how He would be that much with us as well, you know. So, you know, for God to send the angels and say, just act like you're eating, because I mean, He's hospitable. That's what He does. He's so good at it. You know, let Him enjoy this moment. So I can see how that could be very, very much part of the story.
You know, also, you know, He serves them milk and meat, so that's
Right.
also a question.
So you can,
even if they didn't eat, why
Right.
is He serving them milk and meat? If He kept the Torah before it was given, whatever the Torah looked like, not allowed to eat meat or, you know, milk or meat, you're not allowed to give it to anybody else. So many of the commentaries say that He served milk first, and then He served meat. So meat, if you eat meat, you can't eat milk, you know, or any milk product, you know, for 6 hours later, or depending on your custom, either 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever it is. But between milk and meat, right, all you have to do is wash out your mouth, as long as it's not hard cheese, been aged for, you know, more than 6 months, something like that. So then you're allowed to eat meat straight away. So that's not an issue either. And the other thing is that there are these three angels come. So the commentaries say on the spot, which again will knock out a lot of these questions, is why three, right? So, you know, go back to the Beatles, 1 and 1, anyway, is 3, right? So 3 over here, each person or each angel is, you know, has a separate mission. One is to tell Sarah she's going to have a child, right? One is to heal Abraham because he's, you know, 100 years old, circumcision. You know, so one came to heal him, and the third one came to overthrow Sodom.
Right.
Right. That was his job. Now, if you see those 3 angels, each has a specific mission. So that is crucial, because an angel, when God sends them on to do whatever they're supposed to do, they have one mission. And then if God calls them back and says, okay, I got another mission, fine. But they can't change missions. They can't do things, you know, they're programmed to do whatever He wants them, you know, whatever He wants them to do. So therefore He sends three different ones, in order that each one has their own, you know, each one has their own thing.
So it makes it almost seem like I'm just saying this, it makes it seem like angels are like stupid, because all they can do is one thing. They can't multitask. What's the purpose of that? Is it discussed? Is it not even important? And maybe that's why it's not discussed. It's kind of like, you know, the heaven. I mean,
because they're messengers.
Huh?
You don't give,
right.
If you want something done right,
you do one.
Something done properly, you send them to do one thing. You don't tell them to multitask.
Oh, that's a really, really good point. In fact, to further that thought as well, there is a movie coming out now about the empire of McDonald's, right? And it says how he switched all of the whole thing, and he said he found out the most productive thing to do was to hire one person to do nothing but squirt ketchup all day long. Because he said, number one, you could pay them less, and he said, number two, they're easy to replace. So instead of training them like all across the board, give them one thing to do, and they will be very, very good at it. So I can see, how that would be very true.
Does it mean that, you know, God couldn't make them multitask? No.
Right.
You know, but, you know, again, if we go back, you know, we go back to what an angel is, right? You go back to the Greek word angelos, which is a messenger. Doesn't say messengers.
Yep.
Right? He's there to do one thing.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
You know, could God have made him the ability to multitask? Yeah, He could have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, He can do anything. So, yeah, He could have done that. You know, I would think that the purpose would be you get him to do one thing. That's what he's born and bred to do.
Right.
So, you know, you got, you know, whatever. There are a number of examples. You know, there are a number of examples like that. So one thing you mentioned about these Nephilim, right? That means the word Nephilim right? Literally it comes from the root of the word nafal, nun pe lamed. The word nafal means to fall, right? So, Hebrew words have specific, definitely have specific meaning, etc. So, the angels they made this claim, as the commentaries bring out, they made this claim in front of God saying, man is corrupt and you're going to wipe out the world, etc. If you would send us down in human form, we obviously are not going to sin.
Right.
They wanted to try and prove. They wanted to try and prove that we're better than men. If you would have given us the Torah, for example, we wouldn't mess it up like man's going to mess it up. So God says, you got a good point. Let's see what happens. I'm gonna slap you in the body, and I want to see what you're gonna do. I want to see how righteous you're gonna be in a human body. Right? So we spoke about reincarnation way back when, that when the soul goes into the body, the soul comes from God's heavenly throne. Right? It's part of God himself. Right? Each person's created in God's image. So when the soul goes in the body, what should happen? The body should disintegrate. Because that's how powerful the soul is. There's only one problem. Where does the body come from? Body comes from the four corners of the earth. When God formed man, comes from the ground, right? So the ground is impure, right? The body has to go back in the ground to disintegrate, right? After a person dies. So the body traps the soul. It's very hard to imagine this, right? The body is so opaque, right, that the soul is trapped. It's kind of like, Superman coming close to kryptonite. The soul just gets trapped. So when the soul comes in the body, right, so now you get the struggle between body and soul. The body wants to go after physicality. The soul wants to go after spirituality. So there's this constant conflict. So when God gave the Torah, right, he gave us the ability to choose between good and evil. Now we messed it up by eating from the tree, and that, that all changed. We have this evil inclination inside of ourselves. But the reality is that, at that point, the soul should have destroyed the body, but it didn't happen. So what happens? God slaps the angel, these angels in the body, puts it in the body, and then the soul, because of the physicality of the body, gets trapped, and it can't shine like it's supposed to. It can only shine in the spiritual world, right? Either in the world to come or after resurrection or whenever it's going to be. So what happens is the soul is trapped. So in order for it to get stronger, it has to do spiritual things. So it gets slapped in this world. God says, okay, let's see. God says, okay, I want to see how great you are. I want to see how much better you are than man. And what happened? They fell. Right? They went after their desires.
Mm-hmm.
They got controlled by the body. They said, we're better than man. God says, if I would put you in a human body, I'm going to prove you wrong. So they're going to say, oh, no, you're not. Come on, let's see. We want to go do it. Test us. We want to be tested. God says, fine. He sends them down there, and that's what happened.
So they did get cast out, or did God just send them out because, what happened?
They weren't cast out.
They wanted to leave, right? They actually wanted to go and do this stuff, and God let them go.
God allowed them.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
If God wouldn't have allowed them to go, they can't go.
Right on.
Imagine I was, many years ago when I was at an amusement park. They had this ride. Where, it goes round and round to make you make you throw up. And so the whole point is you get sucked in to this thing, and the floor drops and you go round and round and round. Right? So I remember I saw somebody that was tying their shoe, and all of a sudden the ride started, and they got sucked in. Right? So they got sucked in that position. So, all right, that's a little bit of a jump, as a parable, but that's the same thing. If an angel says, I'm going to go, and he's jumping, can he move? He's stuck.
Right.
Suspended animation. He can't move. It's an impossibility unless God, unless he wills it. If he does, if he wills it, fine. If he doesn't will it, then he's not going to move. So when it says, for another example is the soul going in the body. a soul, is basking in God's glory, upstairs. The soul does not want to come to this world. The soul is not interested in the physical world whatsoever. So God has to cajole it and, slap it inside a body. It has to come back to this world for whatever reason. But, as a spiritual being, it certainly doesn't want to do that. So it doesn't have a choice. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, tells us we're born against our will, we die against our will, right? So in parentheses, you still have to live, right? So you come into this world, we're not in control who our parents are, right? Who our siblings are, right? But we're born. God allows it to happen. Obviously, if He didn't want it to happen, you wouldn't be here. So it all stems. It all stems from Him. The mistake people make, which Pharaoh himself as well made the same mistake, is that God is so lost. He lives in that spiritual world. It's like He created the world and then He left. He put the world, so to speak, on autopilot. And because He put it on autopilot, He says, they say like He's too lofty, so these other forces can do what they want. But the Freemasons go well beyond that. They say that these angels come and they can do whatever they want, and they have free will, and etc. Which obviously it goes against what creation is. I mean, I pointed out pretty clear that you worship these type of angels. We don't worship intermediaries, right? An intermediary is called idolatry. Doesn't matter what it is. You give it power. That's called idolatry, which we're supposed to stay away from.
Right.
So I think we have a direct connection, to God Himself. Why do we need intermediaries? We don't need intermediaries, right? Certainly for that. So there's a lot of mistakes that that people make, especially with the snake and with the whole thing in Ezekiel, which if you want to go into a few contexts where, I mean, so some of the things, if you don't, again, everything is context, right? I want to make clear that you cannot look at the text at face value. There are many, many, many things going on beyond behind the scenes, in order to understand. There were certain things that I saw people said, and if I was smoking weed in plaster, I wouldn't have come up with such a crazy explanation. That's not what the text says. I'll give an example, right? You look at the 14th chapter of Isaiah, right? They bring out, it's a support of their, the final and complete downfall of Mr. Satan himself, right? It's the end of a long, otherwise successful career of these fallen angels, and castigating Babylonian leaders. What does the prophet say? What does Isaiah say? Chapter 14, verse 12. How you are fallen from heaven, O morning star. You've been cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. Now, according to them, you are fallen from heaven. What does that sound like? Sounds like maybe fallen angels, right? So who is this morning star? So they claim the morning star is the ultimate demise of Mr. Satan or Mr. S, right?
Right.
But, that's what they'll bring in the book of Revelation. But there are two problems with saying that if you are a Christian. One is that another place in Revelation says that the morning star is also Mr. JC himself.
Yeah, that's
Revelation
something that's really
22.
That's funny.
He is called the morning star.
That may be the only truthful thing in your New Testament. I did not say that. Just want to clarify that right now. I'll tell you what. If it's an adversary, if the whole idea of Jesus turns people against Torah, that would definitely put things at adverse. Yeah, that would certainly rank among the top. So,
but the second thing here is, if you look at what the morning star is, if you look at the context of what Isaiah is talking about, just read it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the chapter before, just read it. Who's the morning star referring to? The evil king Nebuchadnezzar. That's who it's speaking to. The evil, wicked king of Babylon. The prophet explicitly names him as the subject of this prophecy. Right? You go through the chapter, it's clear. I mean, it's clear that's what he's speaking about. And the prophets over there, the prophet Isaiah says that it's talking about the rise and fall of this king. Right? Who had unbridled power to plunder and destroy the temple in Jerusalem. But he's definitely going to fall. Right? So Nebuchadnezzar is compared to a planet. He's compared to the planet Venus, whose light is still visible but vanishes with the rise of the sun. So it's talking about his reign. Right? But again, it's context. If you look at the chapter before and you look at the continuation of this chapter, it's the same thing. It's going on the king of Babylon. It's not talking about fallen angels, at all. So you say, oh, that's your interpretation, and that's what the rabbis say, and that's what he's talking about. If you're a Christian, you can't say that because you got a major contradiction, which
sure.
Many of them don't care about. If you're a Freemason, say, look, that's the proof. Read the context. Any version you want, the context is the same, right? It doesn't change. I mean, another major misconception is you look at Ezekiel chapter 28, when it says the Son of Man says to the Prince of Tyre.
What verse?
28 verse 2. So they claim that this Prince of Tyre is a fallen angel. Now, a prince...
You said they claim. You talking about the Christian teachers? Is that what you're saying?
The Freemasons.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
They're claiming that.
Gotcha.
So here they're saying, look, Son of Man, it's a fallen angel. You go further, it says where you were in Eden, the garden of God, was your canopy of every precious stone, and it mentions all these precious stones. And then it says you were great sheltering cherub, little fat angels, right, with wings. And I was granted.
Did you just say little fat angel?
That's what it looks like. It looks like
That's funny.
You ever see a picture of like these cherubs?
We had a shower curtain.
They look like the face of a child.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're not skinny.
Yeah, they're chubby. They're definitely Oreo babies. That's for sure.
Exactly. Until they learn how to walk, they're plump. Anyway, that's Ezekiel chapter 28 verses 13, and 14. So now, what's that a reference to? When it says Son of Man in a number of places, the Jewish people are castigated. That's not a complimentary thing to say. You, the Son of Man. Right? It's talking about
it's like ridiculing your weaknesses, right?
Right. It's talking about weaknesses.
Whoa.
So here it's talking about the precious stones formed over a canopy over Adam's head, who was in the Garden of Eden. No reference to a fallen angel. And they say, in a great cherub, this short little kid, this great cherub means you were a leader of a great stature.
Okay, so Jesus was called the Son of Man, right? Okay, so but in one of the maybe it's Isaiah, maybe it's Psalms, I don't know. It says, "Give heed not to the princes or to the Son of Man." Yeah. So the only thing I can say is, for me as an ex-Christian, I never saw that verse before until after I left Christianity. Just being honest. So there's plenty of verses like you just mentioned all throughout Tanakh, which is the Hebrew script, the Old Testament, as Christians would call it, that literally cover these details that you're bringing up tonight, and it's just amazing. I am amazed at how much I missed in my studies as a Christian. I'm absolutely amazed.
In this case, there's no mention of a fallen angel, and over there he's talking about the fact that God blessed you because your predecessor was King Hiram of Tyre, played this major role in building Solomon's temple upon the mountain of God. It's talking about this king. Right? I'm talking, Son of Man, you Prince of Tyre. It's talking about a king. I'm not talking about a fallen angel. Where do you see in the text at all? Again, forget Midrash, forget Zohar, forget the Talmud, forget all that.
Right.
Where do you see, this fallen angel and this fat cherub, is going around doing what he wants, right? So they're going to tell you, Son of Man. Well, there are many references in Ezekiel, in Isaiah, in Jeremiah, that when it talks about sons of man, Prophet Jeremiah speaks about that. And he's talking about the rebellious Jewish people that, eventually God is going to destroy the temple. If they don't repent. Son of Man is not complimentary.
That's really, really strange.
I've
totally never heard that. I'm learning totally so much from you guys. Wow. Man, I feel spoiled. You know why? Running to Knock Talk is hard work, but I still feel spoiled because I get to watch every single show, every one. Most of the viewers only watch certain rabbis. I get to see every single one. Isn't that great? I'm learning so much. This is fascinating. I'm loving it. I've never heard some of this stuff before. It's amazing.
Like, for example, I'll give another example. Ezekiel chapter 12, verse 2.
Go in there now.
It says, Son of man, you dwell in the midst of the rebellious house who have eyes to see, but don't see, ears to hear, but they don't hear. They are a rebellious house.
12:2?
Son of man.
Oh, yeah.
Ezekiel chapter 12, verse
good. Hold
2.
on. Let me get there. Hang on. I don't want you to talk too much on it until I get it on screen. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, again, it says, Son of man, you live in this rebellious house. You have eyes to see, you don't see. Ears to hear, you don't hear. Again, this is all metaphorical, right? You see things, but you don't see. You hear, you don't hear.
Man.
But they want to say, Son of Man is this, Son of Man. Obviously, he's talking about a fallen angel, right? But it's clear in the context. All the commentators say it. This is not rocket science, and that is talking about rebellious Jews who are about to get destroyed, and the temple gets destroyed. He's warning them. He's warning them they're going to be sent into exile if they don't shape up.
I'm still so amazed. I'm still sitting here staring at this whole point about the Son of Man. It's amazing because
again, if I didn't know anything,
wow,
and I was like,
that's insane.
I was like plastered, and I was like smoking dope. Okay, I can say Son of Man. That's what it means. But it has, it's a derogatory statement against us. That's what it is.
Wow.
He doesn't say you, the Jewish people. He says you, slimeball. Look what's going to happen to you in the future.
Unbelievable.
You want one other example? Look at, one example they bring as well, Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1. Yeah, it says, on that day, God's going to bring punishment.
You said Jeremiah 27?
Isaiah 27. Isaiah 27, verse 1.
Give me a second. I'm pulling it up. Okay, go ahead.
On that day, Hashem will bring punishment with his harsh, great, mighty sword upon Leviathan, right, that big fish, the bar-like serpent, and upon Leviathan, the twisty serpent, and he will kill the great fish in the sea. So the claim is that fish could do whatever it wanted. It was a powerful fish, no question. Look at the end of the book of Job, the last few chapters. Calls him bar-like, right? Calls him twisting serpent, right? Does that mean, again, forget knowing anything. If we look at this verse at face value, does that sound like, this serpent can do what it wants?
Man.
God brings punishment on everybody.
This is completely...
So the verse here means that the Leviathan, this giant earth-girdling fish, whatever, what does it represent? It's a metaphor, right? Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, there are a lot of metaphors. It's very, very difficult to learn. And people claim all these things from these different prophets. They have no idea what it's talking about. Here, the fish represents great world powers.
That is insane.
So he uses the death of this Leviathan to allude to the eventual downfall of all enemies of Israel.
Now, is what you're explaining right now...
Sorry, 1 second. Why does he use these three descriptions, bar-like, twisting in the sea, to allude to different natures of the world power, of all these world powers?
Unbelievable. So what you're describing now, is that more taught like in the level of Kabbalah and Zohar, or is this like in the Midrash, or is this oral Torah?
This is what the conversation is. It's oral Torah.
Nice, very nice.
This is what it says.
If one Christian would watch this and actually understand this concept, you'll have to forgive the pun. And Rabbi, I'm sorry, but you're the only one who has no idea. But it would flip them upside down to where they would like totally trip. Okay. And again, Rabbi, for now, it's like
a lot of these people
Okay.
aren't interested in the
Yeah.
truth. They, I had this discussion or texting back and forth, with a Karaite, which is a total waste of time. But, I kept asking him questions, what specific things mean. And if you get it wrong, you certainly get punished. Why would you get punished? If you're going to take it literally, but you don't know what it means. So someone else pointed out and said, "Oh, this is a good question. How come you're not answering the question?" And all he kept saying was, "You're this, you're that. The oral tradition is, it's corrupt." And at the end, I finally said, "How many Karaites are left in the world? All 50 or 100 of them. So I don't care what your philosophy is. You haven't given me any answers. Why is it disappearing? Or why have they virtually disappeared?" So I said the same thing to this Freemason, and he didn't care. He said, "Oh, we got people who believe in this, but it doesn't work. You can't pass it down." I don't care. Most people know I'm very big into statistics. If you can't pass it down to the next generation, why do I care what your philosophy is?
Right.
And you're very good at taking things totally out of context. And that's what it is. That's why you need someone to learn with, who knows the text, who can go through the commentaries, who knows Hebrew, instead of going through mistranslation. We saw the mistranslation of evil by the Christians. Why? Because they have an agenda. They cannot say God created evil. Right? So they change it and say it's disaster. So if it's disaster, and they translate it as, they translate it exactly that, I created light and create darkness, prosperity, and create disaster.
That disturbed me as a Christian, actually. When I was a Christian, and like I said, a lot of the viewers out there don't know, and I'll clarify this now. Rabbi Chaim Coffman is an Orthodox rabbi. I am a redneck, a proud redneck, okay?
Right.
Ex-Christian, 15, 18 years. Ex-Messianic for 4 or 5 years. Teacher of Messianic Judaism, okay? And now I'm currently a B'nai Noach. I'm actually not converted to Judaism yet. So with that clarity, it's very important for y'all to. Somebody is laughing. I don't know what they're laughing at, but it's okay. Okay, now you distracted me. Thank you, spiritual Talmud. That's probably a good thing. It just saved you guys, saved me some humility. Probably. All I can tell you is, as a Christian, I have learned a lot of crazy stuff, and that's one of the things that was it was unsettling. Actually, was the whole point. So. All right.
Again, that would refer to natural disasters like typhoons, earthquakes, hurricanes, that God's not in control. Again, this is a hard thing, because if God does that, it makes disasters, then, what about, why the righteous suffer and all that? So that's, that's a different issue. But, the church is very good at, manipulating text and actually, changing what it is. And for them, they have to do that because it goes against their, world view, which, again, if you don't have the eyes to see, or you don't want to see, then these things can certainly, be taken out of context, which, they're totally manipulated, which it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that in the text. And in theory, even if it would, even if there's quote unquote an illusion, why can't you pass that down?
Yep.
Why aren't there millions of people that believe in it? They disappear. The Karaites are not here. You say, oh, the rabbis usurped their power. They did this. You can say whatever you want. Why isn't it in vogue? Why is it not coming back? Why are there 50 or 100 of them in the world today? I don't care what your philosophy is. That's it. It's game over.
I totally agree. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, as they would say. Right. Absolutely. Right? Unbelievable. Wow. Oh, wow. We're actually doing... Okay, I feel like we're only halfway through, but it's already like 9:10 already. We started like 9:06. Let's keep going. If you don't have any interruptions for yourself that you need to pull away with, we'll give it another 10 minutes at least if you're up for it. Are you good with that?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, cool. Because this is just, I'm having a lot more fun with this topic than I thought I would. And the system has not blown up yet. I repeat,
So
the
we're still
system
good.
has
So we're
not
still good.
blown up yet.
You know, the Torah and, the prophets themselves, and I guess this gets into the bigger, into the bigger picture. It's written in the language man can understand. At the same time, when the Torah says in the book of Exodus, God took up the Jewish people with an outstretched arm. What is it? What is it, like Plastic Man? He's got like this huge arm. Well, okay, everybody, let's go. Zoom! I'm gonna take you on my hand.
Oh, that's funny.
God is not a person. God is the being that represents the entire world, the entire universe. What has he got? A huge? Yeah, imagine the big finger he has to pick his own nose. Like, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh my gosh.
You cannot look at. I mean, no offense to God, I have to repent for that one. But the issue is, it doesn't make any sense. At the beginning of, Parsha's Truma, in the book of Exodus, it says that you should give, like a tithe to help build the tabernacle, and God says over there, so I can dwell amongst you. How are you going to put God in a box?
Yep, totally.
How are you going to, how is God's presence felt or somewhat, seen, during the temple period when God's, first temple period when God was there? They sensed something. They saw, they saw things. So it wasn't like hocus pocus. It's, these things are, these are brought down. But, I just want to show, beyond the shadow of a doubt, you cannot learn Tanakh, at all, without having background. And this, people love to go to the prophets and they see all kinds of, crazy things and wild things about, when it comes to the end of days, right? That should be a good topic. You go through, Isaiah and Jeremiah. These are rough books to go through. I don't claim to be an expert in them, in any which way, but, if you know how to learn, you know where to look, so you can get an understanding. But it's not an easy thing to learn, and that's where, the problem is, that's where people have most of their quote-unquote knowledge, because they're quoted these things all the time, but they're twisted into a pretzel. And these things, as you mentioned, they don't make any sense.
Right.
Everything, everything's in context. And even, certain things we brought, we mentioned tonight about, about the serpent and the angels and hierarchy and how these things work, in God's world. Like, this is deep, deep stuff. This is, this is Kabbalah, a lot of it. I'm not a Kabbalist by any stretch, but, these things, okay, we understand, now we get a little more of a glimpse of what it is, but there's a whole world. In my intro to Kabbalah class, I show this clear as day. There's a whole world out there, what's going on with the angels and how things are manipulated and put things into our lives.
Right.
And they're the ones that are the messengers. All that being equal, there's a whole world we don't see.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't fathom. You say, well, if I don't see it, it doesn't exist. Okay, maybe it doesn't exist, right? Maybe in your mind, in my mind, you don't exist. Okay, but, if that's the way it's set up, why don't people, say, which, is not a thing to be afraid to say, is, I don't know what this means. I need to go to someone who's an expert who can tell me what it means, instead of making things up, and, like what happened at Mount Sinai. We're not sure what happened, as the conservative movement might say. Maybe the Jews all ate the same hallucinogenic mushroom in the desert, and that's where the Torah came from. Maybe everything happened with all the plagues because Saturn was out of orbit, right? That's an idea that some people say if you look at where Saturn was and all these quote-unquote natural disasters, but we don't believe in that either.
Right.
So my Rebbe always says it's better to say I don't know than to give what we say a terrible answer. So if you look at these different things, I mean, you're pulling, you want to say what the Talmud is and how corrupt and this. You're pulling a rabbit out of a hat that doesn't exist. You're saying things straight out of your elbow, right? You're saying, I mean,
from your armchair scholar point of view.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly.
It's kind of like being a backseat quarterback.
Right.
And say, oh, I could do this and I could do that, and this football team should have done, who knows what. But you're not even in the game.
Yep. Right.
You're watching the game on TV.
Right.
With your couch potato. You're not even there. So now you're gonna tell me, with all your great knowledge, that you want to go against 3,000 years of tradition that have kept the Jewish people together? That's a big stretch. To say we know better. Like the Freemason wanted to say, I don't need to listen to you. I need to convince you. But I got 3,000 years of history that works, that has kept the Jewish people together. This is a new conception.
I saw a clip on a sitcom where this football jock had come up with his girlfriend knocking on the apartment door of these three scientists, right? And he's trying to be buddy pals with them all. And anyway, he says, he goes, hey, got the latest magazine here. And he says, all about planets this year, or this month. He goes, and the three scientists there, they know this topic like intimately. They said, those are atoms. He goes, yeah, whatever, dude. Okay, so you have this football person who has a high school knowledge, right? He's got this rough exterior. He thinks he knows what he's talking about. He's very confident about it. But he's talking to actual scientists that know exactly what's on that page, like very intimately, and he's like, he completely disagrees with them right there. And that is a perfect example of what I've been experiencing.
I'll give you the following parable. There was good conference with science and Torah. So a scientist comes up to a rabbi and he says, "Can't you just sum up the Torah by saying, be nice to other people? Don't do to others what they would do to you, or whatever it is." So the rabbi looks at him and says, "Yeah, I can sum up all of science and say, twinkle, twinkle, little star." So the scientist has no idea what Torah is and says, can't you just sum up all these laws of the Torah and what God wants and all this by saying be nice to others? Yeah, twinkle, twinkle, little star.
That's funny.
But again, people will make all kinds of statements and say, "Oh, you don't know, and you're this and you're that." When I went to camp many years ago, if someone said something stupid, they would say, "Learn the rules, play the game, practice." That was it. If you want to say something, and you got proof for it, don't tell me this is what the text says, right?
Wow.
Look at the context. See what's going on. You have an agenda? Okay, so you can read the text in whatever you want. Doesn't mean there aren't big philosophical questions out there. There are plenty of them. But see, when you rip it to shreds and you put out your own agenda, and you put things in verses that are not there. They're not there, and in your wildest dreams they're not there. So it just means you have an agenda, that you want to show. And if it doesn't work, what are we going to do? We're going to mistranslate it.
That's funny.
And there are many things, historical inaccuracies, other things, that's for Rabbi Singer and Rabbi Skobac to deal with. But, these things are brutal. They're absolutely brutal. People, someone contacted me recently, asked me about this verse in Isaiah, about the, immaculate conception. He said, does this word mean this? Is it a mistranslation? I said, yes. And the same word is used when Yaakov meets Rachel, right? And, it uses the same word. So he says, that's another mistranslation, right? I'm like, yep. So they, if you have an agenda, when in doubt, change it.
Yep.
Change what it means, because
for sure
we don't have any answers, and it's going to make us look bad and go against everything we're trying to bring out, which is a travesty of a mockery of Hashem, my language.
That's funny. Call me right now if you do not have a chumash. The first person who gets through will actually get a chumash sent to them. A used one, of course. And if you don't know what a chumash is, that's even better. Rabbi, tell us what a chumash is and why it's called a chumash. And the
Chumash
numbers on your
is
screen.
Bible-
Call me right now if you don't have a chumash. Okay, Rabbi.
A chumash is the 5 books of Moses. What they call the 5 books of the Moses, book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, book of Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In case you didn't think I knew what it was. And the word chumash, I know it's a test. It's like, you take this, you have to take like a written test for, for driving. They're like, what does the stop sign mean? I'm like, stop. I think that's just a piece of advice, right? So, chumash literally comes from the word chamesh, chet, mem, shin, which means 5, right? So it's, it means 5 books of Moses. Again, what we'll call the Torah without the prophets or the writings, because that's an acronym for Tanakh, right? Torah, Nevi'im, Kesuvim, right?
There we go. We have a winner. You called in before he actually finished telling us what it was. Welcome to the show. Who am I speaking with?
This is Kelsey.
Hi, Kelsey. So, do you know what a chumash is? Besides what you just heard? Okay, and you do not own one, correct?
I kind of have one, but I know somebody who really needs one.
Okay.
Would that qualify? Because they live locally.
Yes. Okay. Fine. There's 2 given away tonight. Okay. Send me a personal message on Facebook. Let me take this call. I'll talk to you soon. Okay. Send me a message. Oh, okay. I missed it. Dagnabbit. Whoever just called, call me back right now. I couldn't answer fast enough. Kelsey, if you're still online, we're friends on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Okay, send me a message with do you want me to, if you want me to send it directly to that person, just send me that name and address, or if you want me to send it to you and you can give it to them, I don't care, whichever way, just go that route. But that's perfect. And this person is someone who is interested, right? Not someone you're just trying to wholly shine the light on, right? Okay, as long as they're interested. No, I don't want to. I personally have given away probably about 15 or 20 to like Christian friends, and they wound up just like, I don't even want to talk about it. So if they will use it, beautiful. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Kelsey.
You're welcome.
Okay. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye. Okay. Whoever just called, call me back, because I definitely want that person also to get one. So I'll tell you what, Rabbi, like again, this episode tonight was very surprising. I didn't know there was going to be this much juicy stuff involved. So phone lines I'm going to keep open for a minute or so while we kind of wind down. And so Rabbi, so what do you have in mind for next week's hot topic? Have you been thinking about it?
Whatever you want. We can speak about women's issues, speak about end of days, maybe a good maybe a good topic.
End of days, like what is Judaism? But that's not really it's not controversial. It would be educational. Right, that may be our person right there. Are you our lucky winner? Hello? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I am not the Verizon cell phone guy. Just want to clarify that right now.
The redneck, come on.
Okay, so who am I speaking with?
Mason from Texas. You had said call back in, I think.
Okay, good.
My stream's running behind here where I'm watching, though.
That's okay. Did you call because of the giveaway?
I'm barely watching what you're saying.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so are we friends on Facebook?
I think I sent you a request.
What is your...
maybe about a month ago.
And I didn't accept it. Shame on me. I'm looking right this very moment.
I'm not sure. I think I'm following you on Facebook, though.
Okay, what is your... I'm going to send you a friend request right now. What is your Facebook name?
Mason Molina.
Okay, Mason... Oh, come on. Give me more options than that so I don't have to type it out.
Masen.
Oh, okay. Masen.
Yeah, it's not spelled like most other names.
Okay, Mason Molina right now. Okay, I'm sending you a friend request right this moment. Now that we're connected, send me a personal message with your physical mailing address, and I'll get that out to you, okay?
All right. That's awesome.
All right, man. Thank you. You have a good night. Okay, everybody. Phone line's off. We are good. Rabbi, fantastic show. You hit it out of the ballpark as usual, and I am very excited about moving forward to to next week. So we'll discuss, we'll toss around the idea of different topics, and maybe we'll just surprise all the viewers out there with just something that'll just blow your socks off. So, Rabbi, great job, and I look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place, right here to TORAH Talk Live. Shalom, shalom, sweet Rabbi. We'll talk to you later.
Everybody.
Shalom, everybody. See you next time. Shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה